All right, we celebrated yesterday the fact that Nick Chubb was extended, something that honestly a lot of people, myself included, wasn't sure is going to happen. Now that that's out the way, let's talk about the training camp practice that happened over the weekend. Let's talk about if anything interesting happened, who stood out, who isn't standing out. We're going to all get to that, but before I do that, I want to make sure I give a shout out to the patreon.com dog check tier members. I'm going to start with Michael Matique, Nick Merrick, Mike Lapa, Wes and Megan, Tyler Chiz, D.A. Jade, Easley Bash, Joe Hart, Gabriel Wilson, Fred Pratt III, David Valtiar, Relentless Buck, Chunt, Rex Kaufman, Kevin Johnson, DJ Marino V, Edward Carpenter, Matt H, Sign Sheets, Gemini, Liam Freeman, Fight Dirty 74, Yo, Matt Lloyd, Paul Wilcox, Hundo Magnifico, Kyle Stuffer, Lukey from Munich, Deveroff, J Guy 101, Musty Taco, Joe Bobby, Brad Cabo, Dylan W, James McGinley, Arenda Hall, Chad Gimme, David Maldonado, Dylan Hell, Josh Bendorch, Jaleel Salim Jr., Mark M, TJ Showman, Stuart Moore, Cleveland BCI, Robert Jermaine Jr., Dave Mike May, Andrew Hirsch, Curtis Byer, Batman, Bharat Kumar, John Albert, Beerman069, Masayua Buzzer, Roland James, Nemo, Mac House, Reeve Hertz, Philip Wilcox, Marie Vivert, Sean Barron, Goggles Pisano, Corporal Nick Lopez, Dom Gazzulo, Nick Nasty, Ian Whitaker, Colin 216 Christian, Dave Strong, Michael Stone, Billy Moose Gentry, Austin Z, Mark Burnett II, Andre Griffin, Otis Wolf, Dog Pound, Kai Greg Ehlers, Austin Bowling, Lydia Mahawk, Jesus Serrano, Chris Foams, the Picktown Browns backers, Max Neelakenko, Mark Khan, Max Al Dojo, and Water Bear Marketing. Again, guys, thank you so much for the support. It means a ton. Now, let's jump into the video. All right, so this day of camp was an interesting day of camp. Again, they're not padded. You got to take some of these things with a grain of salt. It's not necessarily going to be the greatest reflection on what this team's going to be. But I will say, consistently watching the team in training camp does give you a good measure on how good this team will be, how well they're executing, how well they're being coached. All of these things, it really does matter when it comes to paying attention to the training camp schedule and what happens here, because I think one of the things that happened last year was I was watching a lot of those practices and I got a really good gauge on what this team could do very well and what they did very well, and I think that was real helpful during the season. So I do think what happens here, even in the unpadded practices, especially in the team drills, are important. The first guy I want to talk about is Demetric Felton. I felt like he has had a good couple of days. Today was probably his best day. He looked really good and explosive as a runner, which is important, right? Because first and foremost, we all talk about all the extra things that Demetric Felton can do, but when you're competing for the third running back position, you should also be able to run the ball well. It looks like he's going to be a decent runner of the football, has some good explosiveness, has some good reading ability, good quick cuts, and everything else that you would want out of a running back. We all know that he can be a receiver out the backfield if need be. He can also return kicks if need be. I think that competition for that third running back spot is going to be one of the more interesting and entertaining things throughout this whole camp process, especially once pads get on, because all three of those third running back guys, the guys who are competing for that spot, have looked good and look interesting, right? I already talked about Demetric Felton. John Williams is another name you could throw in there. Dearness Johnson is a guy we got used to last year as the third running back. So I think that's going to be an interesting battle to watch during the preseason, during training camp practices, especially once things get padded up. And I do think Demetric Felton does have the upper hand on these other guys just because he's the 6th round pick. So he's the guy that was actually drafted, and he can bring all of those other things to the table, right? If you need somebody to be a second running back and just take some snaps out the backfield, maybe he can do that. If you need somebody who can just do what Kareem Hunt does and take that second running back, third down running back spot, because Kareem Hunt is injured or missing a game for whatever reason or just tired, he can do that. And if he needs somebody to return kicks, he's capable of doing that. So that's going to give him the upper hand at the end of the day. It's going to be interesting to see how this pans out. Does he have more days where he looks like a good, just flat runner of the football? And I'm really interested to see how he looks like in live competition, especially in the preseason, which, hey, we're days away from that. The next guy I want to talk about is Jarvis Landry. Look, He looks healthy. He looks explosive. I think the lead's been buried with him just because a lot of focus has gone to Donovan Peoples-Jones. A lot of focus has gone to Odell Beckham when it comes to guys who look to make a step. But Jarvis Landry is somebody who I think is going to play a lot better this year than he did last year, because last year, you got to remember, he had that hip injury. He really wasn't himself. He didn't have a touchdown to like week 11 or 12, something crazy like that. And I think all of that really affected his ability to do what he does well and to look as good as he does. I think right now what we're seeing from Jarvis Landry is somebody who looks healthy, who looks explosive as he was in 2019 when he had that career year. So I think Jarvis Landry looks really good right now. And obviously if Jarvis Landry looks good, that means a ton for the rest of this offense, because we know how important Jarvis Landry is. It's one of those understated things that we all kind of understand, but I don't know if we talk about enough. But Jarvis is super important when it comes to this team's ability to move up and down the field. He might not be a big touchdown guy, but you don't get into the red zone if Jarvis Landry isn't on the field. And he's very crucial when it comes to that. Again, it's why you can't boil the game of football down to one or two stats. It's much more complicated than that. And I think Jarvis Landry is a case for that. Also, another guy who's a wide receiver I want to talk about a couple of wide receivers, Donovan Peoples-Jones. The arrow most certainly looks like it's pointing up on Donovan Peoples-Jones. He looks like a guy who was maybe a second or third round pick last year, not a guy who was a sixth round pick. It's hard to forget that he was a late round draft pick for the Cleveland Browns in 2020. So that is obviously really good news. He looks bigger than he was last year, and he was pretty impressively big last year when it comes to his frame. He looks a little bit more athletic. He looks more focused. We know that Donovan Peoples-Jones can do the difficult stuff really well. I think that was one of the things coming out of Michigan. We all knew he has that raw athletic ability to do those things. What I want to see out of him is just to be more consistent doing the mundane stuff, and I think that's really when he's going to start to take over as one of the main wide receivers on this team once they're ready to kind of move on from the Odell Jarvis era, probably in a couple of years. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones is a huge part of that plan, because what I'm seeing from him is somebody who is getting a little bit better at the mundane. He was already a good blocker. I don't see any reason why that would change, but it looks like just the short route stuff, the short area stuff with Donovan Peoples-Jones, that's the stuff that he's really getting better at, and that's the stuff that he struggled at Michigan that made him a sixth-round pick. So if he can tighten that stuff up on top of what we know he can do athletically and what he has the size to do, especially unique size for this Browns wide receiving core that's a little short, I think there's a lot of opportunity for him in the coming years, and I think there's a good amount of opportunity for him this year. I don't think he's going to get like a 500 or 600 yards or anything like that, but I do think he'll be a really productive, 400-yard kind of receiver at least this year, and then he can move on up from there. Another guy I found interesting is Jamarcus Bradley. If you remember the game against the Jets where the Browns literally had no wide receivers because all of them got on the contact tracing list in the COVID policy, Jamarcus Bradley was one of those guys they had to kind of just bring in out of nowhere to play. And I actually felt like he played pretty decently. He didn't have like a mind-blowing game or anything, but I felt like he had decent enough chemistry with Baker Mayfield, and that there was something there. And I think there is something a little bit more there because he's been taking some more number one reps. He's looked pretty good. And again, he looks like there might be more of a role for him in the future. I don't see him being a guy who gets a lot of production this year, but maybe in the future, he's somebody you can look to as maybe, he takes over Rashard Higgins' role or he kind of finds his own role in a much different wide receiving room. Either way, there's some chemistry there. There's some ball skills there with him that I wouldn't mind them investigating further. Another young guy I want to talk about is A.J. Green, not the wide receiver, the defensive back. And he might be the new A.J. Green in the AFC North. I think he has a ton of potential. I don't know where he plays as a starter, right? My instinct is to say he will probably be like a nickel guy and he's going to battle out with like MJ Stewart or something for that role as the temporary nickel guy whenever Troy Hill can't be out there, or in case of emergency if Troy Hill has to go out on the boundary because one of the guys, Grant, Greedy, or Denzel aren't there, then you can slide him in there. Either way, this Browns team has upgraded thoroughly at nickel. I think they have 3 good options there. One of them was the league's best nickel, well, one of the league's best nickel backs last year in Troy Hill. And then behind him, you have MJ Stewart, who I think can fill well. And then you got a guy like AJ Green, who I think can play well out of there. I think he has a future on this team. I don't necessarily know if he's a boundary corner. My instincts say no, but I haven't seen enough of him at a boundary spot to know. But I do know that he's a nice, physical, naggy in the best way type of defensive back. He really does remind me a lot of Terrence Mitchell, not just because they wear the same jersey number, but, just because of the way they play, the competitiveness. And I can guarantee you once they get in pads, there's going to be a fight. And I think AJ Green's probably going to be one of those guys that start the fight because he plays so aggressively that it's just bound to start a fight with the wide receiver. But I like what I've seen out of him so far. The last guy I want to talk about is Marvin Wilson. I think he's been having a nice camp so far. He's a guy that I think you should keep your eye on. He got a nice pass breakup on the line of scrimmage against Baker Mayfield, so against the number 1 offensive line. He's a guy who was, projected to be a first-round pick coming out of Florida State in his junior year. Didn't go pro, stayed back for another year. Florida State was awful. And when you're a big guy on a team that's awful, unless you're like a once-in-a-generation offensive lineman, you're going to get lost in the shuffle. Your draft stock's going to plummet, and that's what happened to Marvin Wilson. He went from, hey, maybe he could be a first or second-round pick to out of the draft entirely. So Marvin Wilson's going to be somebody interesting to watch, interesting to see if he can make this team and the kind of impact he can have. He is a big guy. Like, you talk about guys who could take up double teams. Him and Andrew Billings are really the only 2 on this team. Maybe a Tommy Togiai, but even Tommy Togiai is not as massive when it comes to height and size as Marvin Wilson. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But if you're going to camp or if you're going to watch the preseason games, 65 might be a number on the line of scrimmage you want to watch on the defensive side of the ball for the Cleveland Browns. But that's kind of my recap / review of the camp over the weekend, the camp practice over the weekend at least. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section below. What are you looking forward to in this Browns camp, and who do you want to see kind of break out before this first preseason game? Let me know down in the comment section below. But again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.